Saint Luke, also known as Luke the Evangelist, is one of the four authors of the New Testament Gospels. He is traditionally believed to be a physician and a companion of Saint Paul. Saint Luke is credited with writing the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles, which provides a two-part account of the life of Jesus and the early Christian church. The Gospel of Luke emphasizes compassion, forgiveness, and the inclusion of marginalized groups. In this series, Father Benoit Standaert unpacks the writings of Saint Luke, bringing to us a greater understanding of this evangelist and his writings. As we approach Advent, this series would be instrumental in our preparation for the Gospel according to Saint Luke.
We may say that there is no essential story in the composition of Luke, Gospel and Acts, without a kind of reproduction of that basic scheme of discovering as a marvelous surprise. Remember in the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 8, the Ethiopian. He has been in a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. He goes back. Some say that he is on a camel. And he's reading Isaiah with voice. And the second start is Philip. And Philip has received a message of the angel, of the Spirit. Say, go and follow him. And he's hearing him reading Isaiah 53. And that is the beginning of a complete catechesis on Jesus. Starting from that passage, he evangelizavit. He gives the gospel of Jesus. It's one sentence and two words in Greek to say the whole story of Jesus in those verses that he was reading. The shock is there, they see water. The Ethiopian asks, is there any handicap that I should not be baptized? He got into the water, is full of spirit, and Philip leaves, disappears, like the risen Jesus with the disciple of Emmaus, disappear, and the Ethiopian continue with joy. It's a meeting with the same structure, a double start, and then a meeting, and then a splendid final experience of joy. And look, it is really the parallel of the Emmaus. The disciples of Emmaus started with the life of Jesus, and they could not understand it. And Jesus brings the text and quotes Moses, the prophets, and the writings. And their heart is burning a first time. With the disciples, with the Ethiopian, it's just the opposite. They start with the text. And starting from the text, he goes to the life of Jesus. But here you have a key understanding of Luke. Life of Jesus and text of the Old Testament has to be brought together. And that is the art, the special art of Luke, to provoke that kind of meetings. And I have come to the idea, maybe we hear here a secret of Luke's own life story. He came from a pagan education. Everybody is sure about that. The writer of the Gospel of Luke was not a Jew. A converted, a proselyte, but not a Jew. He came from a pagan education and converted first to Judaism. And he had studied very carefully the Greek Bible that he knew by heart, surprisingly. And then in the meeting with some Christians like Philip. He mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles that Philip in Caesarea had 4 daughters who were prophets. So he knew the family by heart with the daughters. And probably it's by meeting someone like Philip that his inner eye went open, and the relation between text and the accomplishment in Jesus was for him a light and a fire. That is also important for the group he wants to reach. He's not a Jew, and he does not write only for the Jews. His 2 books are open, both on more than the Jewish milieu. And this brings me to a larger consideration on the entire work of writer Luke. As I just said, he wrote 2 books. In fact, it is 1 book in 2 volumes, Gospel and Acts, with the same opening to a certain Theophil and to a certain Theophil. So he says in the first book and in the second book. And the story continues, and Jerusalem is the middle, and the ascended Christ at the end of Luke 24 is again there at the beginning of the Acts of the Apostles. There is a kind of silence between the 2 books of Christ who is in heaven and comes back, and then definitely with the Feast of Ascension after 40 days leaves forever. So it is a clever analysis, kind of traveling from Galilee to Jerusalem, and then from Jerusalem traveling in waves to the end of the world, and Rome being the symbol of that end of the world. Luke has written a lot. Even with 24 chapters, he is longer than Matthew with 28 chapters. So you have not to count the chapters, but the verses. And he comes with more than 100 verses more than the Gospel of Matthew. He is the longest of the 4 Gospels. And after his Gospel, he wrote 28 chapters of the Acts of the Apostles. And today, we know that he wrote around 80, 90, there's more than 40 years after the death of Jesus, he wrote. And it is possible in the last 10 years of the 1st century that he aided and was a redactor or editor of other letters, also of the cycle of Paul. It's my conviction, I am not the only one and surely not the first one, but it's my conviction that the beautiful letter to the Ephesians not only is not of Paul, but is in fact of the same writer who wrote the Gospel of Luke and the Acts. So we see there the same keys and a profound vision on what the church has to be further than the last page of the Acts of the Apostles. So there is continuity and new creativity in this beautiful letter of the Ephesians. So far. So we have to do with the famous editor, and even the structure of his book, his double book, is the structure of the whole New Testament. The basic narratives are the 4 Gospels. And after that comes the letters of the apostles, first Paul, and then Peter, James, Peter, John, and Jude. The final is a kind of apocalyptic end of the book and book of the end, and beautiful hymnic gospel of the Apocalypse. So the whole New Testament, 27 writings, have a double structure. One side, the life of Jesus, other side, the doctrine that you have to think. You can compare it with the life of Saint Benedict, written by Gregor the Great, and the rule of Saint Benedict, where how you learn how to live. And the two, vita et regula, life and rule, has been all over the centuries. The possibility to understand someone, some teacher, some leader, some saint, some founder. And in the New Testament, the key figure of that structure is the writer of Luke and Acts. So you see, to be a Christian is to assimilate the whole New Testament. But the basic structure of the whole New Testament has been given to us through the witness of Luke. And that gives him a special power of integration and bringing especially Jesus and the two great apostles, Peter and Paul, together in one gospel. So you may forget a lot of what I said, but don't forget what Renan had discovered. Luke is the evangelist of what is beautiful. My own contribution is he's also the evangelist of the encounter. And that remains a special art in his way of telling stories. Next time we will see the beginning of his narrative, the two first chapters, well built and very peculiar because more or less nothing is in common with the other evangelists, even if also Matthew has two chapters to introduce Jesus as child. One of the questions we hear several times when we speak about Luke, in the iconography, he is mostly represented, not always, but mostly represented with an ox or a bull. What is the origin of this identification of the third evangelist with the ox or with a bull? Well, everything goes back to a vision that we find in the very first chapter of Ezekiel. Ezekiel has a splendid and surprising and overwhelming vision in his first chapter of the throne and the Merkabah, the wagon of the char, on which the presence of God is coming on the clouds in the heavens. And he sees 4 animals, all with wings, surrounding and dominating by the throne of the Lord. And he identifies them, a lion, an eagle, a bull or ox, and the face of a human being. This has been taken over by the visionary John in the Apocalypse of John, the last book of the New Testament. He has taken his fantasy from Ezekiel and also from Isaiah 6, who he also has seen the Lord coming down in the sanctuary of Jerusalem with glory and with cherubim, with angels and with voices, but not with the animals. Now, the church fathers have received this imagery of the Apocalypse with 4 animals. The 4 animals represent, in fact, the whole creation in 4 attributes. They come from the Assyrian art. At the entrance of the palace of the king of Assyria, there were splendid figures with immense wings of an eagle, with a face and a beard of a human face, with the body of a lion, and with the hooves of an ox. And so there were not 4 animals, there was one immense, terrible figure who had the 4 elements or attributes in one figure. Well, Ezekiel takes his inspiration from that, but says, we don't have such animals at the entrance of a palace. We have all the creation in these 4 animals under the throne of our God. So strong is our God. And he dominates the whole reality of man and beast. That's also the vision of the John in the Apocalypse. The throne is dominating the whole creation. 4 is always a number of the cosmos. 12 and 24 is a number of the time, the 12 months. And with that, the 12 hours of the day and the 12 hours of the night is 24 hours. 12 is each time the time. This time and space are at the service of the throne of the Lord in Apocalypse chapter 4. Now, the identifications started with Irenaeus around 200 after Jesus. But Augustine had a different identification, but placed them also with the 4 evangelists. And then came Gregory the Great around 600. And he has given the fixed identification that will be used by most of the artists. Not all, but most of the artists. When I studied Mark, I had to discover that he had received all 4 images. We know him as the lion, and especially the lion in Venice. That's the city of St. Mark. But Mark has been angel, has been ox, and has been also human face. Now, the final attribute is found in Gregory the Great, and it is always starting from the first page of the 4 Gospels. So, Mark is a lion. Why? Because in the first page, at verse 13, Jesus stays for 40 days in the desert. And the desert is the place of the lion. When you have the eagle for John, the beginning of the Gospel of John is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was by God, and the Word was God. He goes and flies very, very high before getting down, and the Word became flesh. This is the image of a high flight of a high bird, the eagle. And then for Matthew, he starts with the long genealogy of Jesus. Abraham, David, captivity, 3 times 17, he says, 3 times the number of David, and through this number of David, the fullness of the Davidic tradition in Jesus, the son of Joseph, son of David. So that is human incarnation of Jesus, and therefore the human face is attached to Matthew. And Mark then, Luke opens his gospel in the temple. And in the temple, you have the sacrifices of oxes or bulls. And so the ox is typical the animal to be sacrificed and associated with the place of the sacrifice that is the temple. I hope this clears a little bit your mind. There is also, through this temple connection, something of the priestly mentality that is strongly present in Luke in an own way, and that covers also this symbol of the ox sacrificed in the temple. I hope this imagery will not disturb you, but you find the way to recognize the symbols and the Evangelist. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Amen.